Let's jump right into this explainer. Think back to May of 2020. The streets literally erupted in protests following the tragic death of George Floyd. But that massive global outrage wasn't just about one isolated event. It was actually the boiling point of a very long, deeply rooted history. To really understand the depth of that reaction today, we have to draw a direct line back to 1966. We need to look at the origins of an organization born from that exact same struggle, the Black Panther Party.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to see how the party fought this fascinating, high-stakes dual battle, an external fight against state violence and an internal fight to uplift their own community. We'll hit their origins, unpack the 10-point program, look at their social survival programs, examine the FBI's suppression tactics, and finally, evaluate their collapse and legacy.
Part 1. Origins against police violence. Set the scene in your mind for a second. It's the 1960s in the US. It's an incredibly turbulent era. You've got Cold War anxiety globally, massive civil unrest domestically. And while existing civil rights movements were absolutely doing monumental work, for a lot of African Americans, especially in urban areas, those groups just weren't solving the terrifying everyday reality of systemic police brutality.
At that time, the civil rights movement was really at an ideological crossroads. You had Martin Luther King Jr. representing a movement deeply focused on peaceful resistance and integration. But the Black Panthers? They were directly inspired by Malcolm X. They adopted a much more radical philosophy of armed self-defense. They fundamentally believed that to protect their communities from abuse, they had to literally go out and physically police the police.
And that frustration rapidly transformed into a real movement. In 1962, two college students, Huey P. and Bobby Seale, meet. They're searching for solutions but finding absolutely nothing that addresses the immediate danger out in the streets. Then, in 1966, the police killing of a black teenager named Matthew Johnson in San Francisco just sparks massive community outrage. Newton and Seale saw this raw anger and realized, okay, we need to transform this into organized political power. So, in October 1966, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense is officially born, starting with armed citizen patrols to monitor law enforcement.
Part 2. The 10-point program. To really get the Panthers, we have to look past just the armed patrols. They grounded their political identity in Marxist and socialist theories and viewed their struggle as part of a much larger global anti-colonial movement, formally publishing this philosophy in the May 1967 issue of their magazine.
Their very first demand was breathtakingly simple. No compromises. Just, we want freedom. It's such a powerful statement, right? It lays bare the core motivation driving their whole activism. Everything else they built really just stemmed from this fundamental desire to determine the destiny of their own community.
Because their vision extended way beyond just confronting law enforcement. Beyond demanding immediate justice and an end to police violence, they pushed for better education, decent housing, full employment, fundamentally improved living standards. It was a holistic, comprehensive blueprint for community upliftment, the whole shebang.
Part 3. Social survival programs. Now, this was the internal front of their dual battle. To actually achieve those 10-point program goals, they didn't just sit around and petition the government. They rolled up their sleeves and built ambitious community initiatives themselves. They called them, very purposefully, survival programs. They built these amazing networks from the ground up for marginalized neighborhoods. We're talking free health clinics, free legal aid for folks who couldn't afford lawyers, clothing distribution drives, and daily meals for families and the elderly. They were essentially building their own social safety net. 20,000. Just think about that number for a second. That is how many children they fed through their famous Free Breakfast for School Children program every single day at its peak. It was a massive logistical achievement that directly improved the health and lives of thousands of kids right before they went to class. Now here's a detail that totally upends traditional assumptions about the group. The Black Panther Party actually had a female majority membership. Women made up more than 50% of the party and were the absolute backbone running those vital survival programs. Elaine Brown even became the general secretary of the party in 1972. But we also have to note that despite this female majority, the party still faced significant ongoing internal criticisms regarding entrenched male dominance and sexism.
Part 4. FBI sabotage and suppression. So the narrative shifts here to the external response from the state. We're going to look strictly and objectively at the documented facts of how the U.S. government reacted to this rising organization.
To understand the state's aggressive response, look no further than J. Edgar Hoover.
The very powerful director of the FBI explicitly labeled the Black Panthers the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. The state didn't view them as a standard civil rights group, you know? They saw a highly organized, armed, anti-capitalist movement, and they used the full weight of the federal government to stop them.
Their primary weapon? COINTELPRO. This was a covert FBI counterintelligence operation launched in 1967. The explicit, documented goal of the program was to weaken, divide, and neutralize black nationalist groups. The FBI actively worked to dismantle the Panthers' social programs. They heavily infiltrated their ranks with informants and fueled intense internal paranoia through forged letters and totally fabricated disinformation.
The escalation between 67 and 69 was incredibly volatile. In 67, COINTELPRO launches, and Huey Newton is arrested on murder charges he denied and was later freed from after 3 years. But despite that, by 1968, the party still grows to 2,000 members. Then by 1969, things hit a dramatic climax. The party reaches a peak of 5,000 members, but simultaneously, 25 members are killed as state suppression reaches fatal levels.
The FBI's relentless sabotage actually worked to exacerbate deep ideological divides within the party leadership. A really bitter schism formed. You had Huey Newton, who wanted to steer the group back towards social projects and running in local Oakland elections, and on the other side, Eldridge Cleaver vehemently argued for a strict focus on radical armed struggle. Cleaver was eventually expelled, and this deep disagreement resulted in deadly clashes between factions that completely fractured the movement.
Part 5. Collapse and Enduring Legacy. The 1970s and early 80s marked the final years of the party, a period defined by internal chaos, allegations of extreme violence, and a steady decline in public trust.
The organization's collapse basically happened step by step. A major turning point was the highly suspicious murder of the party's accountant, Betty Van Patter. Now, it was never legally proven, but the public widely suspected party involvement, which severely damaged their reputation. Following other criminal allegations, Huey Newton fled to Cuba. When he came back in 1977, his volatile behavior caused key figures like Elaine Brown to just resign in protest. By 1980, the once massive membership had plummeted to just 27 individuals. And finally, in 1982, the Black Panther Party officially dissolved.
So how do we evaluate their complex footprint? Well, on the positive side, they championed a unique internationalist class perspective, blending global anti-colonialism with local social service and community self-defense. But on the flip side, this ambitious vision was ultimately overshadowed by severe internal violence, systemic sexism, a huge vulnerability to FBI infiltration, and eventual isolation from the very public they sought to serve.
Quick side note before we wrap up. I want to clarify a really common historical misconception to make sure you leave with completely accurate context. You might have heard of a group called the New Black Panther Party, which was founded down in Texas in 1989. It is vital to note that this newer organization has absolutely no organic ties, continuity, or relationship to the original 1966 party we've been discussing in this explainer.
We started today by connecting the systemic police violence that sparked the 2020 George Floyd protests to the exact same conditions that created the Black Panthers back in 1966. And seeing that same deadly issue persist more than half a century later leaves us with a profound, almost haunting question from our source material to end on. Have we not progressed at all as humanity? Keep seeking to understand the history behind the headlines.